Welcome, all of you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me be the first one to welcome you to our Leadership Institute for tomorrow's Vision for Success webinar. I'm Dingjo Curry, the director of the Leadership Institute. I want to first of all thank the California Community College Chancellor's Office for sponsoring these webinars designed to lift the vision for each of us in the community college system to achieve success for all of our students. Without the Chancellor's Office support, these webinars would not be possible. And we know that if we are to transform our students, our first goal is to transform us individually with a mindful awareness of ourselves, our mindset with enhanced skills and capacities needed to create impact in our action, right? Our webinars are aimed to strengthen your leadership and to inspire your individual action toward a more just, equitable, and inclusive campus in achieving our vision for success goals. I would like to just run down the vision for success goals of the California Community College system real quick, in case you have not run into them yet. Over the 5 years, increased by at least 20% the number of California community college students annually to acquire associate degrees, credentials, certificates, or specific skill sets that prepare them for an in-demand job. Increased by 35% of our students transferring annually to the UCs and CSU, and I know to many other schools as well, and decrease the average number of units accumulated by our students earning associate degrees. And number 4 is to increase the percent of CTE students reporting being employed in their field of study and reduce equity gaps across all measures among our underrepresented student groups. And last one is to reduce regional achievement gaps across all measures through faster improvements among colleges located in regions with the lowest educational attainments. So those are our California vision for success goals established by the Chancellor's Office. You know, each of us contribute to those goals, and indeed it takes a village. Our strategy here is to grow the leaders in all of us, and especially in you, to help our students succeed. Our topic today is walking the talk of equity. What does it have to do with me and you? We see, you know, banners of equity. We hear leaders talk about equity a lot more these days. But really, what does equity look like, behave like? How does each person on campus intersect with equity, especially our classified professionals who are doing the work on the ground every day? We have an excellent panel today, so let me introduce them one by one. First, from our own Chancellor's Office, Dr. Rebecca Ruan O'Shaughnessy, Vice Chancellor for Educational Services and Support. And then we have Ms. Bezabel Martinez, Program and Project Specialist of Student Equity from Mount and San Antonio College. And Dr. Ajani Bird, Chief Diversity Officer, Dean of Institutional Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion from Foothill College. And we also have today from Michigan, Dr. Paulette Russell, President of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. So as you can see, each of our panel members have a role to play at the program level, campus level, system-wide, and also nationally. I'm going to ask the first question. of our panelists with our classified professionals in mind in particular. You know, they're the most diverse group of professionals we have working in the system. They themselves experience the impact of inequities very often. So I know this is a personal question. How have your identities influenced your own intersections with equity? Since I'm going to be asking you this very personal questions, let me call you by your first names. And let's start with you, Bezabel.
Thank you. So as a Latina STEM student who attended a predominantly white institution as an undergrad that also happened to be a Hispanic serving institute, unfortunately, I did not feel served or represented nor supported at my undergrad institution. I grew up in a predominantly Latinx community, and my high school reflected that as well. So when I went to college for the first time as a first-gen student, it was a complete culture shock in every possible way, both in the classroom as well as outside. Unfortunately, I did not have an educator for the first 3 to 4 years. I was there for 5, who was able to guide me through the college process, through the system, what the ropes look like. And I actually had to do my own personal ethnic identity development through the help of my peers. So I joined a Latina interest sorority that really influenced and helped me along the way. Those were the women, the Latina women, who held my hand every step of the way. My sorority had a lot of STEM students as well, so that also pushed me forward. And so as a classified employee at Mount SAC that happens to be an HSI, I see my job as paying it forward. I want to be the educator that I did not have. So when I interact with students, I always aim to bend over backwards to make sure that their needs are being met. I tried to say yes as many times as I can, just because I know how far me holding someone's hand will take them. And that's what I want to do. I aim to be the educator that I didn't have myself.
Thank you, Bezabel. Rebecca?
Sure. So I'm a first generation immigrant coming to this country when I was 16. So I was an English learner, kind of growing up in a predominantly Asian community, and then went to school in a predominantly white community. So really my biggest struggle has been in the space of a microaggression, and then in the context of this forever foreigners context, right? So from stores kind of asking, where are you from, in a very friendly way, to kind of places where I will see more standards apply differently to me versus my Caucasian husband, for example, right? So those are the things that I experienced more so when I was younger, but definitely, and also in different places in California, and as older, more confident individual, right? So the experience day to day do change a little bit, but fundamentally, those experiences have really formed how I really want to, my intention of really focusing on the details, really thinking from the student experience and not what I perceive the student experience, and think about structurally, right, the design of it and how it's hurting or benefiting, right? Who the structure is set up to benefit, and who the structure is innately set up to really serve to the detriment of.
Thank you. Johnny?
When I think about my identities, I think folks can look at me and name a few things. I'm African American, I'm male, I'm older, I'm able-bodied. However, these identities are only things that you can see and not necessarily a part of who I am. I'm a husband, I'm a younger brother, I battle fatigue, and sometimes a little sensitive at times. I am unique in every way, shape, and form. And so I'm custom made. And so because I embody that ideal that I am custom made, I let people come to me of who they are. And I want other folks to be involved. And so when I work with my classified folks, I believe we should capture everyone from different parts of the campus. And they're not just from A&R, they're not just from EOPS, that they're not just one single identity. They bring multiple perspectives on what they bring to the table. And so I encourage that, and I think about that in my work daily.
I love that framing, custom made. I'm going to remember that. I am custom made. Everyone is custom made. I love it. Thank you, Ajani. Paulette?
Sure. Let me first thank you, Dr. Curry, for inviting me, representing NADAHE, to be a part of this particular webinar. I appreciate it so much. And this question, when you posed it as personal, I want to tell just a little bit of a story. I was a chief diversity officer in a research intensive university, and I'm a woman of color. I identify as African American. I have a terminal degree, but not a PhD. I have a JD, and I'm a licensed attorney. So, you know, you think for a moment, okay, the right credentials, perhaps. And I was part of a grant management team for a National Science Foundation grant, which was close to $4 million, a 4-year grant. And this was to advance women in STEM. And 6 weeks in the planning with the grant PIs and the project director, we had 1 white male, 5 white women. And during the meeting, people were talking all over themselves. And this was something, I was observing it. I was uncomfortable with it, with respect to the talking over each other. On some level, I think internally, it represented to me a form of disrespect, both culturally and certainly how my background and how I was raised. And, you know, this was something, talking over each other, I'm accustomed to in a family gathering, especially during the holidays, but not in a meeting like this. And I said that to the group that were a part of this planning grant management team, myself included. And one of the white women, who was an engineering faculty member, said that this is how they operated in engineering and STEM, having to elbow her way into conversations. And again, you know, we're looking at an advanced grant for women. And so this notion of women being overlooked and talked over was an experience that she was accustomed to. And the best way of dealing with it was to, you know, interject yourself. Apparently that seemed to be the way the other women that were scientists felt comfortable in how they were handling the meeting. And I thought to myself, is this going to be 4 years of me being uncomfortable with a group, primarily white women and white women scientists? And so as I explained to them, at least based on, and I, as a chief diversity officer, I was using this as a teachable moment. And I explained things to them from my own cultural perspective, and that this didn't work for me. The project director, who was a white woman, said, I think what Paulette is trying to say. And I interrupted and said, I don't need white women speaking for me. Now, did it get quiet? Yes. Was it uncomfortable in that moment? Yes. But the project director handled it. And now, after 10 years plus, we're very good friends. We wrote about our experience, including this moment, in a book on multiculturalism in higher education. But it's, you know, I would have thought, given my background, my experiences, and my credentials, that I was coming into a space where I was working with equity-minded folk. And as it turned out, we all had a lot of work yet to do.
Thank you. And I thought I might take just a moment for you to do a plug of your organization. I invited you because I said, I'd like to see more community colleges being in your organization. And how could any community college benefit from being part of your organization to help their diversity, inclusion, and equity work?
Well, I would say this: the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, we have over 1,200 members, many of whom are senior diversity officers, chief diversity officers, practitioners, scholars in this area of EDI, DEI. We have over 400 institutions that are a part of the representation of our membership. And they come from 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions, public, private. We have over 13 chapters nationally, a number of whom are members. We have a California chapter, by the way. And really what it represents is a community for individuals who are committed to this work. It's difficult work, as I think most of us who engage in this work at, whether you're leading it at your institution or you're engaging in this work in student affairs, for example, those of us who engage in work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher ed need a sense of community because it is some of the stresses associated with it, the innovations using evidence-based research. We have a Journal for Diversity in Higher Education. We have a number of membership benefits that I could go on about, but I think to the extent that anyone is interested, all you have to do is nadahe.org, NADOHE, and you can learn all about us. Thank you for that opportunity, though. I appreciate the plug.
Yes, absolutely. Because I would love to have more community colleges. Chief Diversity Officer is a new role for many systems. So I love to have them join you in the work together.
And we would welcome them with open arms.
Great. Now, we have already mentioned this word quite a lot already in this webinar so far. And I know equity actually is not a simple word. It's a very complex topic. And we're not quite used to what equity is really. So can you give us, all of you, just a very simple one sentence, your definition of equity? Equity means, I'll start with you, Paulette.
Well, I think equity means more than fair treatment. It means more than equal opportunity. It requires access to information and resources for all. It can only be achieved in an environment that acknowledges historic and contemporary injustices, but also commits itself, the institutions, to intentionally and actively redress those injustices and barriers through changes in policies and procedures, recognizing the differences.
That's a long sentence, but it
I know.
incorporated looking back and then also then looking to the future. Thank you for that. Oh, Rebecca, equity means?
Equity means the recognition of each person is custom made, and therefore we need to redesign structures and interrogate existing practices to ensure that the exact resources and opportunities are needed for different people to reach an equal goal.
I love that. It's great. Besavelle.
Mine's really simple. Equity means meeting people where they're at.
Well, sometimes the simple is the profound. Thank you. Ajani, as you can see, your custom made is being picked up now.
Equity means actively and intentionally challenging dominant narratives through empathy for the common good.
All right. I'm glad the session is recorded. I'm not taking notes right now, but I'm going to go back and write these down. Trust me, I'm going to review that. Okay. Well, let's operationalize your definitions. What does equity look like from what you just described in your definitions in action when we change the talk to the walk of equity? Can you share one equity-minded practice and what that looks like? Let's see, who should I start with? Besavelle, I'll start with you this time.
Thank you. So in spring of 2020, when we transitioned our campus to the online environment, I was asked to help with the Mount SAC Technology Loans Program. And what I think makes this program especially equitable is that we removed previous barriers that we had in order for students to access campus resources. So at this point, we decided whether you're credit or non-credit, you're eligible for this program, which was something a lot of resources on campus were for credit students only. We removed that barrier. Another barrier, it is no longer for full-time students, it's for part-time students. In fact, if you were just enrolled in 0.5 units, you were eligible to receive a laptop and or hotspot. Again, credit or non-credit. but my responsibility was to call, text, and email students. So again, I met the students where they were at. So we are asking students to make appointments to pick up their technology, but they don't have a laptop. That's why we're giving them the technology. So that's where I come in, is I call students, I text them, however I can, in order for them to come pick up their technology. But going back to meeting people where they're at, equity is this fancy word, but it doesn't always have to be fancy work. Equity can be as simple as saying yes. I had so many educators tell me no along the way because it interrupted their workforce, their workflow. But I decided I'm going to start saying yes. So yes, you can arrive late to your appointment. Yes, you can come as a same day appointment because you forgot to make an appointment because you just got the email yesterday. Yes, someone can pick up on your behalf because the only times that we're open is when you happen to be in class or at work. Yes, of course. And that may seem really simple, but sometimes when you say yes, you're not going to be someone else's favorite person for that day. And that's something that I'm willing to risk, is I'm willing to put myself on the line if it means that my students are receiving the needs and the goods that they deserve and that they need in order to access their education. And I go back to what I had said earlier about, I want to be the educator that I did not have. So I'm going to work this system for you so that you don't have to go through what I went through.
On the one hand, I feel sad that you did not have the educators that you needed to serve you. And the other hand, I'm glad you are in the system serving. And you beautifully said, because we do hear no, you can't do this because, right? And then we cite the reasons. And I love that. Yes, and we can do this. So thank you for that. Let's do the yes and. Perfect. Let's see, Rebecca.
I would like to double down on Bezabel's point of getting us to yes, right? The best equity-minded practice is to be student-centered and design with student in mind, and really assume everything should and can change in service of our students, right? So thinking about what Bezabel talked about there, right? How can we empower, right, the frontline staff and all of our college leaders to shift their practices to meet student needs at a moment in time. And at the system level, we're thinking about what does that mean for some of the permanent changes in terms of regulation, in terms of structure. So we're really thinking about really all of these kind of system level levers we can pull, right? In concert with all the innovations that are happening on campus.
Great. And you have a lot to do with how you can impact system-wide level. Can you give us one quick example? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but since you're from the Chancellor's office, what would be one tiny example of the system level has done that actually made an equity difference for students system-wide?
I think it's really kind of considering a lot of our regulation changes. How do we make policies, for example, our grading, our EWs, how do we make it easier so that students can actually, right, they don't have to go through various obstacles to actually get there, but how do we set up systems to allow them and shift the burden of proving that from students to our institutions?
Great, thank you. Ajani, in your role, what have you witnessed, not just from your current college, but in the past as well? Any concrete example of this equity-minded practice?
Yes, and actually, I'm going to share an example from my current institution. And so when we think about equity-minded, it's important to name what that is. And so for a quote that I'm going to say here is, the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it and then dismantle it. That's Ibram Kendi. And so what that is talking about is really naming what it is you are trying to dismantle. And so at Foothill College, we have created the Strategic Vision for Equity. It's a 13 issues, about 52 goals, right, that the college is committed to and moving forward with. And so we have decided to define what equity is. And so what we have defined it at the college is believing a well-educated population is essential to sustaining a democratic and just society. We must commit to the work of equity, which is to dismantle oppressive systems, structural, cultural, and individual, and create a college community where success is not predictable by race. And so why us naming what we have defined as equity can help us all move in the direction of lowering what it means to be at our college, not having success predictable by race. And so when I'm in conversations already at the institution, when we're talking about equity, everyone knows what we are talking about. And so that practice I share with each of you because we must name it. If we have a guise for what it means for equity, equity could be everything and nothing all at the same time. And so having some level of specificity to what equity is really can start that process of everybody moving in the same direction.
I like that. So it's really modeling when you do the equity action, you name it so people say, oh, I see, that's what equity is. And also at the same time, perhaps when we see inequities, that we can also name that is inequity. So we become much more aware of what inequity looks like when we're not mindful of it. So thank you, naming it. Paulette, you see probably, and I know at your national conferences, you have zillions of equity-minded practices. And so to ask you to give us one concrete example may be unfair, but if you can, what might be one example that really stand out for you that shows true equity in action on the ground level?
Sure. And I appreciate all of the examples that were given. I'm gonna talk about campus workforce diversity. We talk about creating more equitable work environments. Certainly the student experience is very important. But obviously, I think we have to remember our faculty and our staff and the role that they play in creating these equitable environments, learning environments for our students. And oftentimes, when I think about campus workforce, it harkens back to the earlier years when we were creating, we were engaged in equal opportunity. And what did that mean? Well, we also know that equal does not mean equitable. Okay, if we go back to the example that I gave earlier about my experiences with the NSF grant to increase the participation of women. Obviously, the number of years that we've been involved in equal opportunity and trying to overcome what's called the lingering effects of past discrimination, particularly against women and folks of color, we've not been very successful. All we have to do is look at our workforce and we can see where those inequities and disparities lie. And so if I think about this, creating more equitable work environments, that also requires us to engage in hiring practices that acknowledge the need for us to do business differently than business as usual. And that means, for example, looking at the ways in which we recruit. And are we just posting what I call the traditional ways of reaching out to diverse communities and applicants, prospective applicants, or are we signaling in our job descriptions and our job postings that not only are we interested in more diverse applicants, but we are committed to their success? How do you frame that in writing so that individuals looking at it who are actually looking for an environment that will be a good fit? And fit can, that's a tricky word that is often used, that so-and-so is not, I don't think they're going to be a good fit. Well, sometimes we need to interrogate what we mean by fit. And sometimes that requires that grew out of, for example, the advanced grant that I was speaking to, we came up with toolkits. And I think for those of us who are doing our best work at advocating how we create environments that support, we need toolkits. And so those toolkits can give folks they build their capacity to do the work to advance the values of the institution. So a toolkit that teaches you, how to recruit for greater diversity, how to screen, how to ask interview questions that, are designed in a way that keeps diverse applicants in the process as opposed to screening them out of the process. And then how you walk them around your campus in a way that is not just pointing to a cultural center and saying, here's representation of our diversity, but inviting them to interview individuals on the campus that might, from their perspective, give them a sense of the climate and the culture of the institution. To me, that really is putting our equity into practice. That's just one small example of really a lot of work that is yet to be done.
So it's really important, what I hear you say is to have toolkits available for everybody
Sure.
to practice with. And some of these tools may be brand new for folks, right?
Yeah.
But it takes everybody teaching each other how to use these new tools in every part of our campus life.
Yes, and I think about what, and I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly. Johnny, am I? Yeah, okay. And I go back to his point about how do we, particularly using Dr. Kendi's work, create campus environments, for example, that are anti-racist. And just another little plug for NADAHE, if you don't mind, is in the next week or two, we're going to be rolling out what we call a framework for advancing anti-racism in higher education. And we've identified 10 priority areas, and hiring and retention is one of those areas, along with admissions, curriculum, pedagogy, all of those things. If we're going to create more equitable experiences for our students, our faculty, our staff, and those that visit our campus, sometimes what we have to tackle is that unfinished work of race and racism.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. At the beginning, I said it's going to take a village from everybody, our classified professionals, our faculty, administrators, board, and all the other partners we have out there in the community, whether it's community organizations or in the business industry. So yet it start with each of us and each of you, those of you who are with us today. And I wanted to use a quote also by Gandhi, and we hear a lot, is be the change you want to see. So how can any one individual, and if you still keep our classified professionals in mind, how can each one individual exert their own leadership, our own leadership, and our own personal power, regardless of the position that we hold, to create some equity-minded action to make a difference in a colleague, for our team maybe, or in just one student's life. I would like you to give us, our participants today, some easy principles or steps to follow in designing or creating their own individual equity-minded action that they could start maybe today as soon as they leave the webinar. How about start with Rebecca?
Sure. The three steps I'm thinking about. One is really be vulnerable and create a safe space for others and for yourself to learn from one another and engage in the conversation, right? Equity work is difficult. And I'm proud to say, we are leading the nation in really pushing those conversations. So this, I know we're struggling with, are we really the experts? But we are, right? Because we're serving the students every day, right? So we should be the agile learner that we are and the leaders that we are, right? And the second piece of it is, in short, participate and be nosy, right? In all the equity conversations, we have system-wide and on campus. I think about AB 705, I think about C program implementation, I think about the new basic needs center design work. Insert yourself. Equity is everyone's job, right? I'm just gonna call out AB 705 does not mean it's just a faculty space, right? There's a lot of room that we can play. We have to insert ourselves to be in these conversations. As long as we have our students in mind, we are empowered to do that, right? And then the third piece of it is be curious, ask questions, right? And then be courageous, rely on data, right? We have the cover, like the entire guided pathways framework is our cover to change what we see they're unjust and to see where what we see are inequitable for our students. And as long as we lean into data, some of them are going to be hard data, some of it is going to be student experience, right? We are empowered to make the changes that need to happen for our students.
I'm going to push that a little bit further, Rebecca. When you talk about be vulnerable and courageous, and how does someone who feels very powerless in the organization could have that courageous to be have the courage to ask questions? Wait a minute, that doesn't, I'm not seeing equity here.
And I think it goes back to, to create that vulnerable and safe space for you and your partners, right? And colleagues in that space. A lot of times these personal trust is the foundation to have equity conversations, right? And we are in places where we all are custom made. Let me bring back that. We all have our experiences and our expertise in terms of equity. And we only get to the solution if we all kind of are leaning into collective experience and collective learning, right? So I think building that personal relationship is going to be very, very important, and being vulnerable and learn from one another is going to be the critical first step.
Great. Personal space, we can create personal safety spaces as individuals. Thank you. Besabel.
Yes, thanks. So I asked myself 3 questions, and you all can ask yourself these 3 questions. First one is, who is being left out? Who is being left out of your planning committees, your planning meetings? And that's for events, initiatives, grant proposals. I always ask, is your faculty being represented? Is classified being represented? Are managers being represented? What student programs on campus could be included in this conversation? What student leaders can be included in this conversation? Because the more you ask like who's being left out, the more people are going to be included in that conversation and in the ultimate who is impacted by your program. The second question is, what risk am I willing to take? I've talked a lot about risk today, and what you all just talked about of how can we, newer professionals like myself, classified professionals, how can we give them the power to ask those really risky questions. And for what has helped me is one, my union, being a unionized employee is really helpful in being vocal about certain things on campus, but also remembering that because I have that power now, I need to speak for those who are not unionized or who are not full-time employees or who have a bigger risk to take than I do. And then if there are any supervisors on the call, 100% create that safe space for your employees, for your supervisees to vocalize their concerns and their needs, which leads me to my third question that you should ask yourself is, what help do I need? No matter, I'm at this new level right now, right? I'm a new professional and I've already developed the skill of asking for help when I need it. And sometimes I need the help of my supervisor. Sometimes I'm not the best person to share an idea or to ask a question. I am aware of that. And so I rely on my supervisor and let him know, hey, this is inequitable. Can you let your people know? As an associate dean, can you go and let people know that this needs to be fixed? Because this is what I'm hearing from my students. They're coming into the center every day and talking to me and telling me that this is happening. We need to fix it, but I'm not the one that can fix it. You can. And so asking for help, developing those collegial relationships, again, with faculty, both out in student services and outside. Our instructional faculty are so important to us. They're the ones that see our students in the classroom. And so I have developed those meaningful relationships with some of our instructional faculty for that reason. And that way we create events, initiatives on campus that are really impactful for all students. So again, who's being left out of the conversation? What risk are you willing to take? And what help do you need?
Thank you for that. Since you're a classified professional yourself, do you feel that this is something that will be easy, ABC, for other classified professionals to adapt your 3-step?
I think so, especially the last one. If you develop those collegial relationships with people within your division and also outside, the more people you have your back. And then, but also on the flip side, you have to have their back too. You know, it's a two-way street. That has been really helpful for me. And yes, it's definitely having that support. And that's why I also called out supervisors, like you need to create this community for your employees as well.
Looking out for each other, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Paulette, give us some suggestions.
Oh, sure. And I'm thinking about the things that have been said earlier, especially around meeting people where they are. I think there's 3 things that I would want to emphasize, and this is more directed at building your own capacity to understand the inequities that exist in your environment. You know, folks have to do their homework. I've been in this line of work for a very long time. I say it started when I was just a child, probably. I think it's wired in me because it is around, it's building empathy, but it's also understanding yourself and having the ability to recognize things that are happening in front of you that may be making it not only uncomfortable for yourself, or maybe you're comfortable, but you're not being able to acknowledge, recognize the discomfort that may exist within environments, you know, within your own unit and behaviors in your own unit. You know, so building your own capacity to understand what those inequities are by doing your homework, educating yourself about inequities. And if the issue is around the culture or the climate in the unit, and it seems to be having a different impact on individuals based on their race, their gender identity, their disability, their religion, you got to begin to explore, again, this is building capacity, whether there are professional development opportunities, training, education, exploring the literature on ways to create a more inclusive work environment. I think, you know, we're all leaders wherever we are situated. And I think if we're going to approach this and become more equity minded, we've got to do our homework. There's nothing that's easy about this. And it's sometimes it feels intuitive, but you know, there's plenty of research that's available to us. Second, decide you will become an effective ally to improve the culture and the climate in your unit. Understand your own biases. We talked a little, I heard someone mention earlier, microaggressions, and develop skills and ways to interrupt your own biases and in ways that you can intervene when you see others and their biases and microaggressions, stereotypes impacting others. Again, you going back to building your capacity to understand it, you're then, as a result of understanding it, you'll be able to see it when it's happening and develop skill sets at intervening. And the third would be, and others have talked about willing to take risk. Try new behaviors, act in spite of your own fears and resistance from others who come out of more advantaged backgrounds. It's how to be an effective ally. Take care of yourself to avoid burnout. Be willing to make the mistakes and learn from others, and then practice. That would be the third. Develop confidence in your own ability to be supportive of others. Consider different forms of what I call ally involvement, interrupting incidents of bias at a meeting. So when you see, if we go back to my very first example of my own experience of women in that instance, and white women in particular, or white men speaking over others that are in the space, you know, some talk about, you know, the airspace and who has access to it and who doesn't. If you see it happening, and someone who has offered a comment and someone, it's as though they never spoke, and then someone else says it and they says, oh, Johnny, that's a great idea. And it was Paulette who had offered it first. Someone saying, well, you know, I want to go back and point out that, you know, Paulette mentioned this at the start of the conversation. So again, it's practicing ways in which you can intervene as a good ally. So build your capacity, decide to become an effective ally, and practice it.
I love that. And it's being aware first, right? As Johnny had pointed out earlier, but it takes courage. And the first time, I'm sure it wasn't easy. And you really have to conjure up that courage to say something. And then once you practice it, it becomes easier and easier, like anything else. But Johnny.
So practicing my good allyship and building upon what Paulette shared with us of doing your homework. And so I believe the first steps of your action plan need to be about doing the self-work, right? You need to ask yourself. And what I mean by ask, I love acronyms. So ask is about awareness, skills, and knowledge before you take action. And so that was developed by Dr. Jamie Washington and Becky Martinez during the Social Justice Training Institute. And so unpacking, what does that mean? So awareness is really about coming into a room. Are you sucking up the energy in the room when someone else should have that space? Step back. Be that voice if you need to be, but look around and see who is not talking. Acknowledge folks who have talked before you if you're building upon their ideas. Developing the skills. When I'm thinking about the skills, I'm thinking about how to articulate yourself. And so being thoughtful with your words, if you're coming from a place of empathy, that's very different if you're coming from a place of confirming your own biases. Let me say that again. Coming from a place of empathy versus coming from a place of confirming your own biases. That must change and adjust, so developing those skills. And the last part is knowledge. As Paulette has said, have you done the homework? Can you collect those receipts in the background and then articulate yourself in a way so then when you move into action, that action has some level of impact? Because if you only have awareness, zero skills, zero knowledge, and you move into action, you can actually do more harm than good. And so these three areas, when you ask yourself, it's developing competency in some capacity in each of those different areas. So then when you do engage, that you're going to be making an impact.
That's wonderful. Can you just repeat those three real quickly, starting with the empathy part?
Yep. So ask or empathy, which part?
Well, the first one I remember that you started was, responding with your empathy.
Yes. So
rather than your own bias.
Yes, absolutely. And so the acronym is ASK, awareness, skills, and knowledge before you take action. So ask yourself.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I got lots of notes taken from your comments. Thank you very much. And I wanted to see if there's any questions out there, leaving a few minutes, because I have lots of questions if our participants don't have. Okay, well, we can continue on with the next part of it. And I wanted to see from your own experiences, what has been the biggest challenge you think, individually or at the institutional or at a program level, to overcome this barrier of providing equity, to make everything truly equitable for every student's success in our institutions? What have you observed to be that biggest challenge, and what overcame it? At one example, if you can. If anything that comes to mind, please jump in.
I think for me, it's been, and I was in a very large institution, especially with respect to our students, the failure of administrators too often and faculty not to listen to our students. When I think about what the needs are of students, we make a lot of assumptions about what students need. And what I have found over the years, our best works, especially in terms of creating student success, is being more conscious of what the students articulate as their needs, being more invitational in creating access for them to have voice to step down, if you will, from that place, that hierarchical space that we've created, and make it a more inviting opportunity for students. And acknowledge that there's no one size fits all. And based on the range of diversity presented by students on campus and the intersecting identities of those students must be reckoned with. And I think, you know, as uncomfortable as it has been, I mean, I don't like student sit-ins because, you know, the first thing that happens is Paulette gets invited in to come and manage the situation, at least in those instances when we've had student sit-ins or student disruption. But, you know, I have found that if you work more closely with students and you develop a relationship with students, you have credibility, and they're more apt to be willing to sit down and dialogue with you.
Okay, I do see questions coming in, so I want to make sure, if you don't mind, I push the pause button on mine and turn to our participants' questions. This one I'm going to ask Johnny to answer. I think you probably are closest in terms of on the position level. That the question is, what would you suggest a way to advocate our campus to participate in design implementing important frameworks for DEI currently happening in college campus? This is from a middle manager's perspective. This is the middle managers in our experiences on campus. And the last thing is, especially when you lead a department historically marginalized on campus. Johnny, what would you say to that?
I'm just reading the question again for myself. Okay, so I think the way to do it as a middle manager is to be the work and be the change that you want to be with that framework that you're trying to design. And so you must live that truth. And so with that particular model that you're looking to create, you're typically over a division, a department, a space on campus of where you can show that in action. And so where are those receipts? Where is that knowledge? Where is that homework? Where is that awareness of how you're doing this work, showing that it's being productive, that it's making a difference and making some level of change? And then it's elevating it. Then it's announcing it further and wider in the circles that you have. What's very important for me is understanding my sphere of influence. Where you're at, when I was a director of a department, my sphere of influence was directly with my unit. A little bit further out was with my students. A little further out was with my supervisor. A little bit further out, college committees, so on and so forth. And so understanding that when it's much further out, it's going to be a little bit weaker. But equity is about touching all parts of the institution. And so I would suggest starting more centralized to where you're at, and then bubbling those different spheres outwards.
I love that. And then also planning it, like you said, with the end in mind, what is the result? And then tell that. Thank you very much. The next one is about how effective would it be to just see each other as human beings and not see color or gender or differences? Instead, focus on what we have in common. How we can be unified. That's a hard question. I like to ask Paulette if you can address that.
Sure. And as I was reading it, I was thinking about the things that we have in common. For example, would be advancing in my career, for example. But for some, that is something we share in common. I want to be comfortable in my work environment, but that discomfort or advancement, unfortunately, can be influenced by how people identify me based on my gender or my race. And to the extent that those characteristics influence behavior, then there are times when we have to create steps that will acknowledge that some of the reasons for my discomfort or my failure to advance have nothing to do with the common things, that the goal that we have in mind, or the things that unify us in terms of my success or us wanting to be successful. And there are times when we have to interrogate why some things seem not to work as well for some as it might for others. And it, unfortunately, I think it would be, given the experiences that we've had in the last almost 2 years with COVID and the disparities that we that exist, those things didn't happen because, of it wasn't happenstance. Those things unfortunately arise because and exist because of differential treatment and the failure to acknowledge that health inequities are based on race. They can be based on income. They can be based on gender, at geography. And so there are times when the interventions are just going to have to be tailored to what is the result or what is causing those differences.
Thank you very much. And our time is up. So I'd like to just circle back to our esteemed, wonderful panel to see if each of you will have just a really brief concluding comment, final words to our participants today. Ajani?
I was listening to a podcast recently called How to Be a Professional Troublemaker by Levy Ajay Jones, and it's called Disrupting the Greater Good. And essentially she talks about be, say, do. Be what you stand for. Be those values. Say, speak up in meetings. Be present. Do you mean it? What you're saying? Can you identify and define, have those receipts of what you're talking about? Can you say it thoughtfully? And all of those things are true. If you can say yes to all of those elements, you should probably speak up. And that last part is do. Be in action. Don't be performative. Be in action. And now have you guys walk away with, will your silence make you proud? Think about that. If you're in a meeting and you have your gut, something happens and you're staying silent, can you look at yourself and you're having a proud moment there? And if the answer is no, you may need to speak up. And thank you.
Okay, our time is really up. Panelists, would you like very brief final words?
As a classified employee, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. If anyone has questions for me offline, I'd be more than happy to chat with you.
Thank you.
I
Rebecca?
wouldn't-
Thank you. I want to be brief, but it's really important to acknowledge, right, the paradigm shift from right to fail to student success, right? What that really means is we're rejecting the notion that some failure is just given, it's baked into higher ed, right? So that really means we have to own student performance and student outcome. Their success is our success, right? So that is really, really important. And I'm just trying to respond to some of those comments, right? When we design our structure, we have to design them with the most vulnerable in mind, because this notion of, right, a rising tide lift all boats doesn't work. Data shows that. So how do we really think about that, right? We don't design with the average in mind. We should design with the most vulnerable in mind. And then also one last thing I want to say is equity is hard. There's no set solution out there to address equity, right? So do-overs are absolutely okay. No one gets to own the equity space alone and exclusively.
Thank you. Paulette, final word.
Yep, choosing to participate in making our institutions more equitable environment is difficult work. That's been said. I would say to folks who are interested, Nadahi is a place for anyone who is interested in advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice on our campuses. Certainly our community colleges. We want those of you who need a place and a community, please feel free to join us, nadahi.org. It's that simple.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our panel one more time for joining us today and giving us lots and lots of insights. I hope that this has helped you to understand more about equity and also the way that in which you could create your own equity-minded action to walk the talk of equity. I also want to thank my staff, Myra and Chris and Jerry in the Chancellor's office and working with me to make this webinar a success. This is the very last one of our fall's webinar series. We will be offering more in the spring. And we have the Institute. We won't be offering webinar next month. We are offering the Institute November 15 through 18, as you can see on the web. So Myra is putting in the registration link should you be willing. And I hope that we have you with us at the Institute next month. So thank you very much for joining us today. And please remember to fill out the evaluation for us. Your input is extremely important for our future webinars. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.